To all of our distinguished guests from the United States Congress, and most especially someone we are truly proud to call a native son, a native of Pike County, Congressman John Lewis, welcome and good morning. My name is Judy Bonner. I have the privilege of serving as president of the University of Alabama. On behalf of our mayor, Walt Maddox, our board of trustees, our students, faculty, staff, and alumni, it is a real pleasure to welcome you to the campus of the University of Alabama. It is a special pleasure to join Alabama's congressional delegation in welcoming their colleagues and other special friends to our state and to this campus. History is alive at the University of Alabama, and today, the members of this pilgrimage kick off an extra special visit to commemorate the 50th anniversary of a movement that changed the world. As individuals, a half-century marks the tipping point of being slightly more than middle age. But in the life of our nation, or certainly in the life of a campaign for equality and social justice, 50 years can be seen as either a long, slow journey or a big, bold step. The doors you passed as you walked into this auditorium are the very ones that Vivian Malone and James Hood walked through on June 11th, 1963. I deeply regret that they are no longer with us, but both participated in the commemoration of the 40th anniversary, and Dr. Hood was with us when we dedicated the Malone Hood Plaza. This year, we are focused on the courage it took for these young students to walk through the doors of Foster Auditorium when they registered for classes, and then into the classrooms, the dorms, the dining halls, and so many other doors that opened to them that day out of the glare of the national media. As we remember Vivian Malone and James Hood, we also celebrate the changes that have taken place on our campus, in our state, and in our nation as a result of their courage and determination. The University of Alabama's commitment to courage, change, and progress is unwavering. As the capstone of higher education, our goal is to always be number one. And while we have much further to go, we are very proud of how far we have come. We rank second among the nation's flagships in the enrollment of African American students. With over 4,200 students enrolled this fall, 12.6% of our students are African American, compared with 4.7% for other flagships. We have 20 National Achievement Scholars in our freshman class this fall, more than any other public university in the nation. Even more importantly, we rank third among flagships for the percentage of total degrees conferred to African American students. You see, we believe that walking in the doors is simply not enough. To do our job well, our students need to go out the doors with degrees from the University of Alabama. Since 1965, over 14,400 African Americans have earned degrees from this university, and they have gone on to make us enormously proud of their accomplishments in their chosen fields. The success of these young men and women who walk out the doors with degrees from the University of Alabama is the greatest legacy that Vivian Malone and James Hood left for future generations. Again, welcome. Ours is a state, and the University of Alabama is a place where we can all learn from the past as together we work for a better future for all of our people. We hope you enjoy your visit to our campus, and we hope you will come back again and again. And now it is my special pleasure to introduce to you Vivian Malone's baby sister. Dr. Sharon D. Malone is a partner with Fox Hill OBGYN and is an associate clinical professor at the George Washington University. Dr. Malone graduated cum laude from Harvard University in 1981. She received her medical degree from Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons in 1988 and moved to Washington, D.C. for her residency. Upon completion, Dr. Malone joined Fox Hill OBGYN in 1992 and has practiced in Washington for over 20 years. Washingtonian Magazine has consistently named her one of Washington's best doctors. Dr. Malone is on the board of the D.C. Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. Her work there reflects both her interest in the health and well-being of young women, as well as her interest in the societal impact of teen pregnancy. She is on the board of trustees of the historic Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. She was recently appointed to the selection committee for the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction, awarded by the University of Alabama Law School. Dr. Malone is a native of Mobile and a sixth-generation Alabamian. She is the wife of Attorney General Eric Holder, and they are the parents of 3 teenagers. Please welcome Dr. Malone to the podium.
Thank you very much, President Bonner, for that kind introduction. And I would also like to extend my personal thanks to Congressman Lewis and to all of the wonderful people at the Institute of Faith and Politics for inviting me to be here today. I have made many trips to the University of Alabama, but this is the first trip that I've had to make for one of the commemorations of the schoolhouse stand without my sister. I would like to take just a moment, since we were here last, 10 years ago, to acknowledge those who are not with us today. And many of these are people who were very, very much integral pieces of the Stand in the Schoolhouse Door. Since in those 10 years, we have lost Judge Constance Baker Motley, my sister Vivian Malone Jones, Nicholas Katzenbach, and most recently, James Hood. Now, I remember as a child, and yes, I was alive 50 years ago. I know it's hard to believe, but I was. And I remember as just a little kid growing up in the shadow of a famous big sister. And I saw it just as something that always was. Oh yes, Vivian, she went to the University of Alabama. And I asked her, I said, you know, Vivian, why did you go to the University of Alabama? And she said, well, you know, she remembered reading the newspaper in 1954 when the Brown versus Board of Education decision was announced. And she said for the first time, after having attended segregated schools for all of her life, that she thought of something that she would be able to do differently than what she had. And as a matter of fact, up until that point and further, everyone in my family in Alabama had attended segregated schools. We are sixth-generation Alabamians. My family has been in Alabama for almost as long as there has been a state of Alabama. And my sister simply said, if she did not have the right to attend the University of Alabama, who did? Now, I see things a little differently now because I don't look at this as the sister of Vivian Malone. I look at what she did in 1963 more as a parent, because I have a daughter who is exactly the same age that Vivian was when she entered the University of Alabama in 1963. And when I look at those films and I see the coolness and grace that she exhibited under pressure, I'm amazed. But I think even more amazing to me is the courage and faith, and I do mean faith, that my parents must have had to deliver their oldest daughter into the hands of the Justice Department, the attorney, okay, knowing what I know now. But I think that she and my parents had a much greater faith that all would be well at the University of Alabama. Now, the threat that she actually faced was not imaginary, it was real. The year was 1963, and in the few months leading up to the confrontation at the University of Alabama, and the history gets compressed, people forget. You know these events singly, but when you put them together, you really understand how important and how real the threat really was at that time. 2 months before the confrontation at the University of Alabama, of course, a few months before that, Governor Wallace had made his statement in his inaugural speech: segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But they were not deterred. In April of 1963, Martin Luther King would write his famous letter from the Birmingham jail. In May of 1963, the marches in Birmingham, which resulted in Bull Connor turning fire hoses on young children, had just happened. So this was the climate in which she and James Hood entered the University of Alabama. They knew the danger, and they decided to go ahead anyway. They had simply waited too long. I have to say that I look at those pictures and I think of all those people, and the one thing I have to say to myself is that I really don't think that there are any accidents in the universe, because the planets have aligned in a way today such that we have members of the University of Alabama faculty, we have members of my family, members of Governor Wallace's family, the Kennedy and Johnson's family. And I don't think that it is an accident that we are all here to celebrate this moment 50 years later. And to give you a little more context, on June 11th, the day of the confrontation, Vivian and James Hood would be accompanied by the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, who was in constant communication with the Attorney General Robert Kennedy and his brother. They would successfully enroll in the University of Alabama, and no small part of that was also due to the faculty and the president here at the University of Alabama, who also ensured her safety. Now, this evening of the confrontation, President Kennedy would address the nation, and for the first time, he would make a civil rights speech that framed civil rights as a moral issue. He would say, "We are," and I quote, "we are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and as clear as the American Constitution." With that, I'm sure they must have my sister and James Hood must have felt very proud. Now, the other piece of this, as a parent, my parents were not able to be here with her that day. On the advice of counsel and the Justice Department lawyers, they said, to ensure her safety, it's best that you not come. My parents were at home, and this was before email and cell phones and instant communication, and they had to wait and hope that all would be well. And hours after, simply hours after President Kennedy made that speech, Medgar Evers would be shot and killed in the driveway of his home. That was the news that my sister and James Hood awoke to the following morning. This was their first day of school. But in the words of the Negro spiritual, she and my parents were not going to let nobody turn them around. They had come too far. And while she was at the University of Alabama, I can only imagine how lonely she must have been. I remember Vivian telling me a story about her first day in class, and I said, well, Viv, how'd that go? And she said, well, I walked in the class and sat down, and all of the students got up and left. And I said, well, what'd you do? And she said, well, I just stayed there, and the professor gave the lecture, and we went on as if everyone was still there. She lived in a dorm where many of the girls were friendly in private, but publicly would not be seen with her. But she stayed the course. And I would like to know how many of us would like to have spent our college years with federal marshals in tow. She studied in the harsh glow of spotlight that was focused not on perhaps catching her successes, but hoping to document her missteps. Yet she succeeded when many people in the state would have been happier to see her fail. Now, she stayed here. She graduated in 1965, which was also another watershed moment, as Congressman Lewis knows, in the history of Alabama. Less than 2 months before her graduation, Congressman Lewis and Hosea Williams would be beaten and battered on the very bridge that we will cross on Sunday. So amidst the bomb threats and death threats, she stayed the course, and she did become the first graduate of the University of Alabama. And as I've said before, there are really no accidents in the universe. Her first job after graduation was in none other than the U.S. Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, under then Attorney General Robert Kennedy. She would be present that day when President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And not only that, but she would live a life that was dedicated to civil rights, and she would succeed none other than Congressman Lewis as the executive director of the Voter Education Project. Well, in closing, I would just like to share something that Kathleen Kennedy was kind enough to share with me. And this is a letter that he wrote to her on the day of the confrontation at the University of Alabama. And it is dated June 11th, 1963, 4:45 p.m. Dear Kathleen, we are in the midst of registering 2 Negro students at the University of Alabama. Despite the opposition of Governor Wallace, I hope by the time you go to college, these problems will be far behind us. Love to you, Daddy. The French have a saying, which, and I'm not a French speaker, so forgive me, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, which simply translates to, the more things change, the more they remain the same. It's 2013, 150 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and 50 years after that historic confrontation at the University of Alabama. And although it has been that long, there are still issues of race and inequality that plague us still. But I am encouraged. I'm encouraged by the bipartisan group that is assembled here today. I think from understanding comes tolerance and change. It's 2013, and for the first time since 1963, we have a member of the Wallace family, and the Malone family, and the Kennedy family, and the Johnson family here, and we're sharing a stage. And for the first time since 1963, we have a brother in the White House and a brother leading the Justice Department. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malone. And now it is my honor to introduce Peggy Wallace Kennedy, the daughter of two former governors of the state of Alabama, her father, George Cornel Wallace, and her mother, Lurlene Wallace. In his first term as governor from 1963 to 1967, when Peggy was a teenager, George Wallace became one of the most prominent symbols of segregation in the South and across the country. He later apologized for his actions and won the trust of many African American voters. Mrs. Kennedy has long dedicated her own energies in promoting positive race relations. She is featured in the documentary George Wallace, Setting the Woods on Fire, which won the Sundance 2000 Film Festival Special Jury Prize. Mrs. Kennedy and her husband Mark have joined in the pilgrimage in Selma previously and participated in the reenactment of the 1965 March across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They and their son Burns will be present throughout this 2013 pilgrimage. Mrs. Kennedy.
It was one of those white, hot summer days. Dappled sunlight fractured into diamond sparkles as it plunged beneath the almost clear water of the lake. The humid air hung heavy like pancakes under a red light warmer. My feet dangled from a makeshift swing laying low under the bough of an old oak tree. We were at my mother's wood-framed, green-painted cabin set deep in the slough of Lake Martin, Alabama, a place that offered Lurlene Wallace comfort of how her life used to be alongside a rutted, deep dirt road deep in the heart of Tuscaloosa County, simple, unobstructed, and safe, a sense of peace that comes with escape. There was an unseen intruder on that day, a taut wire that seemed to tug my mother up and down a small wooden pier jutting into the water, pulling one hand through her coarse mane of thick brown hair while nursing a cigarette in the other. Her security detail of one had grown to a cadre of uniformed state troopers. She stood alone and bereft. Where had I heard this wind before change like this to a deeper roar? What would it take my standing there for, holding open a restive door, looking downhill to a frothy shore? Summer was past, and the day was past. Somber clouds in the west were massed. It was June the 11th, 1963. It was the day that my father stood in the schoolhouse door. I was 13 years old. My mother was 36. In less than 5 years, she would be dead, immortalized in myth and beloved by thousands. That day was the end of her hope for a simpler life, for it was the beginning of our living beneath the shadow of the schoolhouse door. After nightfall, we rode in silence back to the governor's mansion in Montgomery. The day was never mentioned again. It was as if it never happened. There was never an offer of an explanation from my father. When the subject was broached, it was brushed aside. Even at the time, it all seemed so illogical. As I grew older, it seemed even more so. My father was a lawyer and respected former judge. He understood the Constitution, and I assumed was familiar with the United States Supreme Court's opinion in Brown versus Board of Education. He had seen other states fail in their support of forced integration. Even understanding his legal obligation to follow the mandates of a federal court, he persisted and even negotiated for an opportunity to stand before the nation to argue for a lost cause. Much like the photograph of soldiers raising the flag atop Mount Suribachi during the Battle of Iwo Jima in World War II became an iconic image of valor in war. The photograph of a diminutive George Wallace standing in front of the schoolhouse door, draped in an oversized microphone, became an iconic image of the face of white Southern defiance to equality under the law. Witnessing the personal journey of my family as it unfolded across the pages of Alabama history is a story that may never be written, but the personal challenges and relationships that we endured would no doubt add new dimensions to the understanding of one of the most complex men in the history of Alabama. Although many viewed my father as a caricature of absolutes and bright-lined edges, for me, he was a man hidden in a gray mist of contradictions. History tells of his journey to understanding through suffering, of his deep sense of caring for people, for his acts of kindness to the downtrodden, and his own journey on the road to Jericho. At the time of his death, he was beloved by legions of both whites and African Americans. And still today, as I travel through Alabama, I am always reminded of the love and admiration for the life of Governor Wallace. One cannot travel very far in this state without seeing the physical imprint of his legacy in the form of schools, universities, industry, hospitals, advanced science research institutes, centers for caring for those who cannot care for themselves, and roads and bridges that fuel the economy of manufacturing and commerce. But still, there is this asterisk of June the 11th, 1963, that will forever define and denote the character of George Wallace. My father owed me a conversation, an explanation for what he had done, or at least to share with my sons when they ask why. I've read the words of historians, have heard the rhetoric of both the apologists and skeptics, but that alone will never satisfy my longing for the absoluteness of a simple answer, something my father never gave me. And now, 50 years later, this historic place, surrounded by monuments to the confrontation of June the 11th, 1963, a significant battle in the war against segregation. The images captured that day will forever remind us of the confrontation between George Wallace and Nicholas Katzenbach, and the grace that Vivian Malone and James Hood demonstrated as they walked among angry crowds. But there are no photographs of a 13-year-old girl sitting on a swing under an old oak tree, watching her mother standing alone under the blaze of a summer sun. Today, I have made my own journey to Tuscaloosa to stand in the place where my father once stood, with my son by my side, and with his brother serving America in a distant land. I stand in the schoolhouse door as a testament to change. I can now give to my sons what my father never gave to me, a conversation, an explanation, something to share when their children ask about their grandmother and say, why? Today, I rise to proclaim that for too many Americans, the schoolhouse door of opportunity, equality, and freedom remains closed. Today, I rise to condemn the politics of exclusion that runs rampant in America. For America is at her best when she embraces all of us, protects the least of us, and offers her bounty of hope and prosperity to not just some of us. We, the people of America, deserve a better government, not a bitter government. Today, I rise to ask you not to just remember how far we have come, but to commit to the struggle that lies ahead. There will be no more stands in the schoolhouse door, but the insidious underbelly of discrimination still lies like a pall over America. Today, I rise to ask each of you to stand in a schoolhouse door every day, to encourage a child, to comfort a parent, to speak, to walk, and to pray for justice for all in our country in our lifetime. Today, I rise to celebrate something that would have been unthinkable on June 11th, 1963. An African-American president serving his country with courage and determination. A man who deserves to be judged not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. And today, I rise to proclaim that the 13-year-old girl who shared a life-changing moment with her mother on June 11th, 1963, stands today before you at peace in the knowledge that perhaps when her end days come, it will be said that her life will not have been in vain. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I just want to thank you, Mrs. Kennedy, Dr. Malone, and Dr. Bonner. Thank you all for sharing. Dr. Bonner, we thank you again at the Faith and Politics Institute for just welcoming us here at the university. My name is Andrea Wise, and I'm the program coordinator at the Faith and Politics Institute. After each program at each of our venues, I will be sharing logistics and directions for how we can move as a group to our next stops. Before I give directions for our next program, I'd like to invite Congresswoman Terry Sewell up to share brief remarks.
I want to invite Dr. Bonner to stand by me. First of all, welcome to the 7th Congressional District of Alabama. It seems remarkable to imagine what happened here in 1963, but I would be remiss if I didn't record the 50th commemoration in the annuals of the House of Representatives. Today, I wanted to present to the very first woman president of the University of Alabama, a copy of the congressional record in which I, as a daughter of Alabama, a person who grew up in Selma, Alabama, a person who now has the opportunity as the first African-American woman to represent this wonderful state, and to have as the crown jewel of higher institutions in my district, the University of Alabama. It is humbling. But I would be remiss if I didn't take note of the amazing progress that we've made. While we have many miles to go, I think it's important to honor the memory of Vivian Malone and James Hood and the amazing progress that the University of Alabama has made to now have a female president, to have so many students who have done so many great things. We celebrate the diversity of the University of Alabama, and I present to you this congressional record. It is commemorating this day.